Greetings to Jessie Millner, an incredibly adept and perennially sterling wordsmith. And let me tell you, I'm prejudiced. Jessie and I attended the same MFA program. Was it 20 or 25 years ago?
It was, yeah, it was like during the Pleistocene.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a while back, but it was a great time.
It was a great time. We studied with Campbell McGrath. Rick Blanco was with us. It was wonderful, wonderful days. I particularly loved, and in this new book of yours, Memories Blue Sedan, the combination of a sort of elegiac as well as memoir, family history, national history. It was a great and varied read.
Well, to me, it's really interesting. Like my family, extended family, has been on the south side of Virginia since the late 17th century.
Wow.
And so it's, especially like in the 90s when I started like having access to the internet, as we all did. And many of my far-flung cousins started posting family minutiae that they'd found in shoeboxes and all kinds of places, started posting on the internet. I was just really amazed at how a lot of the history of my family was kind of interwoven with the larger history of our country, you know, and in ways that are good and in ways that are pretty terrible. In fact, what I'm thinking about now is like the first, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, sort of halfway raised me when I was a kid, and it was on a farm in Virginia. And she taught me how to read, and she told me stories like when I was a little kid, great stories. And one of them is about how her grandmother, when she was a little girl, remembered when Sheridan came through the, Sheridan, right? Philip Sheridan came through the Shenandoah Valley. And late in the Civil War, and they were trying to destroy all the food resources for the Army of Northern Virginia. And so she told me the story of her grandmother remembering when the Yankees came. And how her grandfather, how her mother and father had sewn hams and sacks of flour into mattresses.
Wow.
And so I thought that's pretty cool. And then she also said someone else in the family got in trouble, someone who lived near Richmond, because she was selling apples to Union soldiers for a penny, stuff like that. And so I grew up with this. And then my great-great-grandfather, maternal grandfather, fought with the Army of Northern Virginia. And so I just had this, like, growing up, that oral history, and later on the stuff I found on the internet was kind of woven with my interest in history in general. You know, my great-great-grandfather was buried at the Battle of the Crater in Petersburg, and he's buried in the cemetery there. And so all of these places that I heard about, like when I was a kid, you know, as an adult, I've been able to visit these places, and I've read a lot about the Civil War and American history and stuff. And it's sort of, you know, the way that the oral narratives that I heard when I was a kid match up with the things I would read later. The bigger story of Sheridan marching through the Shenandoah Valley, the bigger story of like what happened then, and you know. So, but it's also, it's interesting for me, and I have to say that I grew up sort of half time with my grandparents, and half time I was like in San Diego, California with my mom and dad, and like growing up in a much more liberal kind of environment. And so the one of the central issues that I faced as a kid, you know, was the fact that you know, a part of that whole history that I'm talking about is like, it's also connected with racism, and it's also connected with some really, really horrible things. And so that to me, reconciling and trying to figure out a way that the darkness of the past with the human stories and the people I knew, and just trying to like make sense of all that has been a big part of like a big part of the things I write about, and how like especially today, you know, what does that mean like for me as I go through the world and see what I see today, and see how all of these things that I had thought had died out or were on the decline, and see them resurfacing with such energy. You know, it's been profoundly disturbing.
I have a relative who is researching her slave ancestry, and I sent her your poem, Birthright, and it was just very well received. I'm wondering, do you have a copy of your book? Would you be willing to read that, or maybe Last Will, either one? I think it's just a very nice treatment of the issue of racism, and I don't remember that you actually explored that much. I could be wrong, 20 years ago or 25 years ago.
No, I think 20 years ago, the other sort of darkness in my family was alcoholism. And some family secrets, and I think I was exploring, and that sort of ties to everything else. Why don't I read Last Will and Testament, because it's shorter. And I have, you know, it's not, I don't usually, you know, like to explain poems, but in this case, I think it's important. There's like an actual, this is like from a will of my maternal great-great-grandfather. Great-great-great-grandfather. It's all the greats add up. Peter Daniel, who was a real, you know, real person. Anyway, it's like one of my uncles years ago went around courthouses. This is before the internet, and he found a copy of my uncle's last will and testament. I mean, my great-great-grandfather's. And it was like horrific to read, because it was like everything was divided up for his heirs. And it was like really this, it was like nails, you know, all the stuff on the farm, and humans, the slaves, you know, and their names and who went where. And one thing that profoundly affected me at the time was like this family, you could see in the language of the will that they were this mom was being separated from her children. And it was just this matter of fact, like the nails, like anything else. So okay. Last Will and Testament, Richmond, Virginia, 1863. My great-great-great-grandfather, Peter Daniel, faced with the certainty of death and the uncertainty of life, left 1/9 of his estate to my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Harrison, who was away fighting in the Civil War. I'm looking at the names of Peter's slaves, Sam, Clara, John, Rhoda, Fanny, and Child, Sally and 2 children, Letta and Child. However, we commissioners on examination find it impractical to divide said slaves in 9 equal lots, and under said order and by consent of the parties have assigned said slaves in 5 lots, to wit. It doesn't say if Fanny kept her children, or Sally, or Letta, and I suppose it says a lot that the children are nameless, like the 10 hogs or the 2 barrels of nails the old man left to Sam. Through the glory of the internet, I found out more about Peter Daniel, how the Southside Virginia town where he lived in the 19th century became Danieltown because of all the relatives who settled there. After the war, the Daniels fell on hard times, and when my Uncle Jay visited the ancestral farm in the late 1980s, it was owned by a Black man, and the family cemetery had become a hog lot, where sows, and piglets rooted happily among the fallen tombstones. And can I tell you how many times I've thought of children torn from their mothers, how often I've dreamed of pigs and ghosts and white bones shimmering in moonlight. So, ugh.
Yeah. Devastating. But one thing I appreciate about your book is while you do face what's devastating and ugly and corrupt, you have the fun of wanting the poem about I want to be a toaster or aliens hiding in refrigerators. So it's a really fine read for me anyway, because I get to travel so many places emotionally.
Well, to me, it's like one of the reasons I love writing is like that whole area of your subconscious is filled with just all of these amazing things juxtaposed against all these other things. And so for me, writing like poems like this one was so easy to write because it was just essentially it was all there.
Yeah.
You know, and other poems like the one about the crows, it happened, you know, it's the way that poems happen. There was like a thinking about childhood and playing baseball with my uncles and all that kind of stuff. And then it just leaped into this weird crow thing, you know, and I have no idea how and why that happened, you know. And so, yeah, that seems to be like, for me, it's like sometimes poems almost like inhabit a memory or something, and they're pretty narrative and literal. And other times there's a little spark from something and they just, you know, I can't explain what they do and why they do what they do. And I don't want to know, to tell you the truth.
I was asking myself why I like your poetry so much, and this was just sort of a big question. And I remember bumping into the idea, a sort of stream of consciousness thing, okay, that negative capability that keeps no irritable reaching after facts or meaning or dogma, but just an impulse towards beauty or transcendence. And I just, that to me is sort of consistently part of your, what, engine?
Yeah, it's like the negative capability thing is so brilliant. And for me, it's like when I think about Keats and I think about that idea, it's more than just poems. It's just like a way of being in the world, you know. And it's like, I think the only way that we can be in the world and keep whatever sanity we have left, you know, because it's like, and again, I think for me, the reason I write is because I have questions. I have all kinds of questions all the time, you know. And the thing that a negative capability allows me to do is just to have the questions and see that they simply lead to more questions and more questions and more questions. And there's something satisfying about that. Without the, you know, it's just like becoming invested with, okay, this is it. This is what it all means. I got it now, you know. And I think I was conditioned because I was raised as a Southern Baptist on the notion that there was an answer to the question, a very noble and very soothing in some respects answer. So to me, it's kind of interesting to be in this different place.
Well, it's useful for the reader too, I think, to recognize that this is a writer who is tempted by all this irritable reaching and is getting all this programming from the culture, but still seems to push through for some kind of, let's say, call it redemption, not necessarily religious, but that to me is gratifying, maybe too, because in one of my lifetimes I was also a therapist. So the psychological process of making art and how it assists or bridges is endlessly fascinating. And
I don't frankly understand how people live if they don't have something like this, like writing. And I think, you know, the realization that it's a spiritual discipline as well as like everything else that it is.
yeah.
However, and you know, I think for other people, they find it in other kinds of in religious ways. So, but this is to me, this is an authentic way for me to do it. It's the one that feels like, you know, I hate to use the word the right way, but it does. I mean, it feels like the only way that I can like function.
Well, it definitely works for you. It works for me. And for any of those sort of young poets out there, I would encourage you to read this book. It was incredibly useful for me. And I think you'll find inspiration. As a matter of fact, after reading Jesse's book, I sat down and came up with 2 poems that I'm particularly happy with. So there's nothing like reading to trigger what's sort of burbling
Yeah,
beneath your own. Yeah.
I think that, you know, because I teach, you know, and I see the relationship between reading, you know, and creation. And it's not only like, it's important to be looking at people's work and seeing what they're doing from a craft point of view. But it's more, to me, it's the other stuff, like, you know, what in the world is going on here? You know, and just being kind of, everyone is like, everyone who's writing a poem is like, it's an incredible moment, you know, of discovery, if it, you know, and so just the idea that of reading and internalizing all of these other moments that people are apprehending things that are just so beautiful and so sad or so whatever they are, but so authentic. I remember Dorian Lux in the late 90s, I saw her at FIU, she was visiting and she gave like a workshop. And she was talking about like what poets should do to write, you know. And it was really cool because she said, well, read poems and memorize poems and read more poems and read and read and read. And I've never forgotten what she said. She talked about the craft and all that kind of stuff, but she said the most important thing is you're internalizing all that music. And it's like smoke. You're breathing in all that, and then it's gonna come out again. And however it comes out. And it's like that part of it is kind of like, you mentioned Campbell McGrath earlier. He doesn't like the metaphysical junk like that. So, but it's true. It's really true that there's something like, something that can't be quantified. That's, I think, the most important part of the writing process and the imitation process, not imitating like slavishly or anything, but the imitation of the joy in apprehending something and finding something.
It feels a little bit like a positive contagion.
Yeah.
And it's a trance, almost like trance state sometimes. You were talking about your teaching, and one of my favorites in this volume was I'd rather be a cowboy.
Yeah, that really happened.
I know it did. It feels.
Well, it really happened in the sense that one of the things about teaching composition in particular is that like people ask you in the middle of talking about like MLA style or something, they regularly want to sidetrack you. And either that or they're young and they just not following along very well, or they're like me and they lose track of what they're doing. So they will ask me, you know, this I think was in the context of the Mayan calendar. Will the world end in 2012?
Right.
You know, and so I get that all the time. I mean, well, there was like, you know, it seems like perpetually there's a Christian cult somewhere that says the world's going to end on April 23rd at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you should like get all your stuff together. And so I get that question a lot. And I also like, it gets to be kind of metaphysical at times. Like we have discussions about like, you know, what happens in the afterlife, and all those kinds of things come up. And so I usually tell them, I'll say, well, you know, this isn't really for class discussion, but if you come to my office after class, I can tell you what happens after you die and whether there's a God and all that stuff. And so, you know, and then it's really, again, it goes back to what I've discovered with writing is that the only answer is to keep questioning and to stay on that path of looking for answers. And again, I think our Western culture does everyone a really great disservice by offering like these, I shouldn't say this, but I think it's like kind of a disservice to offer simplistic kind of answers to these really profound questions. And I think that people who, you know, are really invested in different religions, I mean, I think it's not simplistic at all. But I think that for some people it has become that, and I think that's a problem. You know.
And if education is going to do what it needs to do, I would think it would encourage exploration beyond a sort of dogmatic black and white. At least that's my view.
Yeah, yeah, and I think again, it's not to comment too much on the current moment, cultural moment, but I think it's like the dogmatism is like really there, and the desire for like answers that make everyone in a certain group very comfortable with their lives, I guess. I don't know.
Well, actually, one thing I also appreciate about your work is when you tackle something like with some kind of social commentary, that hymn to kudzu. So this has, you know, ecological ramifications, but there's no sort of self-righteousness in it. There's a playfulness at the same time, very specifically detailing, you know, the negatives. That is very appealing to me.
Well, I tell my students we live in Florida. We live in Florida, and I'm sure it's true all over the United States and all over the world. But it's profoundly beautiful and profoundly disturbing, all in the same scene. You know, it's the juxtaposition of really beautiful places and really not so beautiful in the sense that they're man-made, and some of those places are nice, I guess, but it's just, for the most part, I live in Fort Myers, which when I moved here was seemed quiet to me. And now it's like apartment buildings and malls it's like Kia pets, they spring up overnight, you know. And so in the time I've lived here, which has only been like 15 years, it's like the built environment has profoundly overtaken what had been really, really beautiful like places that were kind of in between. And now all of this stuff is just coming together. And so, to me, it's, when I write about it, it's disturbing and it's beautiful. And at the same time, I live here and I participate in the, in the whole human part of it. So I don't see any reason why I have any right to be self-righteous or to look at you people, because I am those people. I am we all are. And I think the way I see it, like with writing, is like whatever few people read my poems or anything, I want them to see that it's just, I'm a witness. This is what I see. This is what I see, and I think, the whole idea of showing and not telling, the cliche about writing, I think like that's sort of, instead of saying, isn't it awful? Aren't we terrible people ruining the world and everything? Instead, it's like, look at that beautiful corn snake crushed on the side of the road by a car. Or look at that, like the other day I picked up a box turtle and carried it into a pond that was on the road. I was riding my bike. And so it's like, it just, I've had this conversation with Michael Hedek, who I think is like, I just have to mention that, just a great poet and human.
Yes, he is.
And we both talk about the tenderness we feel towards animals, and the tenderness we feel toward, especially now, because of this thing that we're talking about, because of the juxtaposition of the man-made and the natural, and how the man-made is even more encroaching on what little places the natural had. And you see animals like, you see them in this disturbed kind of place, caught between these two worlds, and it makes me really, really sad. Really, really sad.